So I am Carl. I am the CTO at 2600 Hertz, and I'm not exactly sure how that happened, but that is how that worked out. So what should we talk about today? Well, I have dreams of what Kazoo can be, and here's what we're doing about that at 2600 Hertz. I'm going to go over a little bit about what we've done, what we're working on, and touch on where we're going with that. So what have we done in the past 12 months? In a brief summary. Because, of course, I can only hit the highlights. So I'm going to cover a little bit about some of the bugs and improvements in the dependencies that we have tackled, the installation, making that process easier for you guys, Monster UI, which, of course, you've seen quite a bit of here at this conference, the provisioner work that we're doing, what we titled Project Phonebook, and internationalization efforts that are still ongoing. So let's talk a little bit about the bugs and improvements in the dependencies. So, as you all know, we use Camilio as our SBC. We have a fork of that, or at least a clone of that, in our own repo, where we added the module dbKazoo. Now, dbKazoo is originally built by Anka, who was originally part of the Camilio development team, and has since moved to work at Facebook, as I understand it. But when she left, we still had more work that we wanted to do and more improvements that we wanted to make. And because of the limited time that we had with her, we had gone ahead and built dbKazoo around the idea of using the database abstraction layer already in Camilio to provide a SQL database to the scripting engine. And so it was basically taking the writes and the reads and converting those into AMQP messages, which had some drawbacks, but also had some pros. I mean, we were able to get it out. It works reasonably well, and we were pretty happy with what we had. But again, when we went to go and enhance it further and build out the end goal, we found that it was lacking. So thanks very much to Luis, who did a tremendous amount of work. We have actually refactored dbKazoo significantly. And now we have addressed the major pain points in the previous module, the most pressing of which being source tree and the Camilio packages, and it will carry Kazoo within it. Which also means that the Camilio community and development team are looking at our code and telling us where we can be better integrated with Camilio and do a better job with some of the things that we're trying to do there. So that, however, has, by their request, caused us to rename dbKazoo, because it is no longer using that database abstraction layer, to just Kazoo. And so once that release, because 4.2 was officially frozen and is now going through their process of becoming a released version, which is not yet released, but once it is released and we have migrated to it, we will be deprecating the Kazoo-Camilio repo and RPMs, and we'll simply use the public and normal Camilio RPMs and packages. In the meantime, however, because of all of this work, we can now backport and move off of our current version of Camilio, which is 4.0. So we now have the ability, since we have it in 4.2, to cleanly move that code into 4.1.6 on our repo and provide an upgrade path just off of 4.0 and into the new Kazoo module with the new bug fixes and enhancements that go along with Chameleon. One of the reasons we couldn't do that before is because the abstraction layer needed some additional components in the various other modules, and so we couldn't cleanly move that code to the next version. So that's very exciting, and we're very happy to have that go upstream. So this work was really important. And one of the reasons why is this paves the way for what could be termed smart routing. And this would be, we now have the ability within the scripts, within the Chameleon scripts, to determine via communication to Kazoo where to route the calls. So the dispatcher that we currently have is not very clever. It just round robins to any available free switch. You have two different, you can have a primary and a backup set, but that's about the extent of the cleverness that it does. But we can now interact with Kazoo and say, for instance, where does this customer have his shards as far as his actual services go? Which resources provide the service that this call needs? Or where is the call that this call is trying to pick up or transfer or do some other operation with? So we can very cleverly route this within the Chameleon script, so it's very dynamic, very easy to update, and very easy to manage. The other side, of course, is now we have that real-time control. So we're gaining the same control in Chameleon that we basically have in FreeSwitch. So that paves the way for a dream project that I have to move Trunk Store into Chameleon completely. So the beast of Chameleon, as you guys probably are well aware, if you ever look at its resources, it's idle 99.9999% of the time. If you run your trunking platform there, you get all the advantages of Kazoo, but you do it at an incredibly efficient way versus sending all that traffic off to FreeSwitch. So, and I'll get a little bit more into why that is something that we've been targeting for quite a while. But this also, of course, improves your performance dramatically, because now we have workers that are dedicated to doing the type of work that Kazoo needs it to do, rather than doing the work that a database layer needs to do and then shoehorning our use case into that. So that, again, provides the enhancements that your customers will feel when it comes to things like parking, BLF, and MWI, and things of that nature. But wait, there's more! So we now can asynchronously control messages and receive messages coming in and out of Chameleon, which is paving the way for things like, oh, I don't know, SIP message. So as we start to progress down this path, we are now taking more and more low-level control of the SIP messages, which lets us do other interesting things that we'll be rolling out here shortly. But in addition to that, we gained more control over the notify packets. And most recently, we've been working to implement the Polycom parking orbit, which is, well-crafted notify packets that let the phone detail all the calls on the screen that are currently in a parking slot. You go scroll through them, select the one you want, and pull it back out of the parking slot. Additionally, this means that you can use the same parking slot name on all the phones, but yet they are individual parking slots. So they have maybe register all the phones for park, but it knows that that park for that phone is its own slot, its own unique parking slot. And we can move MWI out of FreeSwitch. That's something we've been doing for a very long time, is we send a special FreeSwitch event in that says craft a notify packet, send it out, bounce it out of Chameleon. It's a bit of overhead. It's not horrible, but it is one more efficiency that we gain by simply sending it from the SPC where the phones are registered. There's no need to bother your internal network. So that is actually quite nice. And so what does that look like? Just to really drive it home, this is Chameleon script code, and we're issuing at the top there a Kazoo query. So that is a synchronous request to the Rabbit exchange. For those of you who know, that is just you can think of it as the funnel where the messages come through for call events. We have a specific routing key, the call event that we want. We make our request, and we'll get a response that KZ capital R is the Kazoo response. And we had to introduce into Chameleon some JSON parsing so that we can pull elements out of our message. So we have what the Chameleon refers to as transforms. We have this kz.json. and that is getting specifically the switch URL. So I can make a query to Kazoo to say, where is this call ID? I can get the free switch Sophia switch URL off of that return, that reply, and then put it into $DU, which is what the destination that Camellia will route to. So that's huge for the performance. And if you stop and think about it, how we currently do conferences would be another great example. When you call in, because you round robin, you'll end up on any arbitrary free switch server. So our conference app will then find where the conference focus is currently and bridge you to it. Now I can direct calls right from the SBC to the conference, to the actual conference where it's running, but yet not have a fixed box that runs that particular conference. So that's really nice. And then beneath that, Camellia has introduced what they refer to as event routes, and these are asynchronous things that happen. It was primarily added for WebSockets, but we've tied in and extended that further so that now messages coming from asynchronous messages coming from Kazoo can trigger internal events in Camellia. And so we can even send Camellia commands this way. So we could maybe do some of the management interface commands. We could ask it to restart or reload the dispatcher list. I mean, we could either use the query to synchronously give it a dispatcher list, or we could issue a DS underscore reload on demand. So you can go to a UI, add a free switch server, click the button, all of your SB seeds reload the dispatcher list. So there's lots that we can do from here. So that's Camellia. So let's talk a little bit about where the calls go after that. That would, of course, be FreeSwitch. So again, we are working to contribute our patches and everything upstream. If you actually go to their fisheye, the source view, you will find that there's a branch in there, 2600 hertz pull request. There's some things they like, some things they don't, and so we're working through those, and eventually they will accept them, and you will be able to download again the stock free switch, which will come with mod Kazoo, and you don't need to do anything special. You don't have to go to our repos, you don't need our builds, and as they progress through their versions, just like in Camellia, our code will be carried along with that, so we'll have a much faster, more rapid integration with that. And again, once they release those versions, we'll depreciate the Kazoo-FreeSwitch RPMs and repos. So just be prepared for that. One of the biggest fixes that happened to the platform, or at least the most significant one this year, was we fixed an implementation detail with the Erlang interface. So they are trying to mask some of the magic of Erlang behind the scenes, which involves heartbeats, ticks as they call them, that go back and forth to tell the other nodes that you're still connected, you're still alive. Which means that when you receive a message and you ask it to pull it from the socket, sometimes it writes back to that same socket. So your receive command can write to the socket. And I've played with this before when I tried to duplex the sockets in two different workers, and it was causing crashes because I didn't know it was doing that. And that was way back when we first wrote it. So it was something we were aware of, but it does cause us to send and receive from the same thread in mod Kazoo. Because we, like I say, unless we put a mutex around that receive loop, which then blocks a writer, then we have no guarantees it won't use that same file descriptor. So what we found, though, is because we have to do that, we need a timeout on how long to wait for some data to come into that socket. And once we hit that timeout, we can then bounce out and send any data that's waiting to go back out. And that's the way it currently works. But the timeout we found times out in the middle of receiving data. So it's an absolute timeout, which is a little unexpected. So what it was happening is, if your packets took longer than the timeout we had pre-configured, then it would time out while it was receiving it. And that would cause the packet to be corrupt, and our code would just drop it. It was an unknown request. So you would see this with very large ring groups, is typically where we saw it. We also saw it when we were working with range networks and deploying into some loosely connected environments. And it was causing a command to be sent from eCall Manager that never appeared in FreeSwitch. So large ring group, would go, if you were in the same zone, if you were in the same data center, they would work. But if they then went to a different data center from a cross-connected eCall manager, sometimes it wouldn't work, just depended on the network latency at the time, which was, you can imagine, took us a bit of time to find. But we have identified that and removed it, and we have provided globals.receive underscore, receive underscore timeout as a configuration option. And we've set it to, I believe, 150. I'd have to double check that. And what that allows you to tweak is you can trade off the chances of hitting the bug for more performance if you absolutely need it, or if you're hitting the bug in low latency environments, like for instance over satellite links, you can bump that number way up to compensate for that. Now all of this will go away. I've been working on a patch to the Erlang library that we use so that there would be a receive that would allow the application to deal with ticks, which means I could finally break the writer and the readers out into two different threads, and this would be a non-issue at that point. So there is a long-term patch coming, but there is a short-term correction that is in there right now that you should be aware of. And if you haven't updated, you should. I believe this is on all the FreeSwitch versions that we provide right now. So what can you look forward to coming out of FreeSwitch? Well, another big optimization that I have long since been talking about doing, that I am absolutely going to do this year if it kills me, is Mod Kazoo right now, when you bind for channel events, because of the way that that works, we send channel events to everything that requests it, and all eCall managers make the same requests. So for channel answer, create, and destroy, those three events particularly would be very useful to not send to every eCall manager. Because that means that we do twice the amount of work on CDRs, one writes, one conflicts. That's just how it currently works and designed to do that. It's how we ensure that a CDR is saved. BLF, it causes us to do more work to try to dedupe the message and sometimes send multiple messages out, which in the past has been an issue because of the loosely connected way we were to Camilio. The versions, if you're familiar with notify packets, would get out of sync. And some other performance overhead with what messages are on your bus and things like that. So in Mod Kazoo, however, we need to know that those messages got to Kazoo, because those are extremely important. Those are used to write the CDRs. They're used to do the billing, the auth-z stuff that we do, so they can't be lost. So we can't just dumbly round robin them. And in addition to it, because those are some of the noisiest messages that come out, we have to be clever about how we actually go about making the round robin occur. So, for example, I can't just send it to a node that's partially connected and hope that it got there. And I also can't send it to a node and think it didn't get there and send it to another node, or nobody would expect that. So it is a bit tricky, and it's a bit tricky to do it without having to lock some kind of state every single time. And I think we've finally got some ideas about how to implement that efficiently. And again, I talked about making that connection writer-reader thread that we have right now full dupex by modifying the Erlang interface library. And I don't know if you guys have been following, but FreeSwitch has been working on something they call Mod Verto. And we've had great presentations here about all the WebRTC work. And of course, we're using SIP.js as our underlying layer for the SIP signaling. But in WebRTC and the browser, there's a lot of other signaling layers that we can use. They're not dictated by those specifications for a reason. That's room for innovation. That's where you can do all kinds of interesting things that SIP can't or isn't good at. And so, of course, the quickest and easiest way to get to market was to use SIP because we have a SIP platform. But FreeSwitch has been making huge strides in Mod Verto, which is a non-SIP signaling WebRTC endpoint within FreeSwitch. And it does extremely interesting things. Some simple things. It does, stereo put in big, here's what I did this time, and issue a pull request saying, this fixed this documentation, this is something I ran into, and build up a knowledge base within the installation tool, which should make it much easier moving forward. We've also been working a lot on our build server automation. For those of you who don't know, there's build.001.fmt.2600hertz.com. Oh, there's a C name now. :8080 for those of you who've been going there forever and ever and ever. That's a Jenkins build server that is tied to our Jira installation and automatically pushes versions back and forth with it, builds the RPMs, keeps a couple artifacts there so you can see what's going on. Has actually a pretty decent change log from the Git tied into GitHub, and we're working to make that an even a more prevalent something that you can go to see what were the latest changes, what was in the latest RPM, repackage those into the RPM as well. So that's an ongoing effort, but we're making good strides there, and the RPMs are getting better and better all the time. And of course, if you actually look at the repo and not just use yum to do the install, but actually visit the repo and look at the listings, you can see we've been shifting things around. We created the 3 environments, the latest, staging, and stable. And we started to move some of the RPMs around, and we're going to continue doing that. Right now, latest doesn't represent our intent. Our intent for latest is to do nightly builds if things have changed in the representative projects. So those will literally be the latest RPMs possible, bleeding edge stuff. That bit of automation isn't currently there. But the rest of those, staging always represents what we've deployed into QA, the end of every one of our sprints. And stable represents what we're deploying into our own production environment that we consider stable. So you now have some insight into our process, and we'll be providing a lot more insight into that. But to come back to the installer script itself, that is the brains behind the ISO. It's bundled in the ISO, but it is a standalone script. As a matter of fact, it's actually 2 standalone scripts. There's a standalone installer and a standalone setup wizard. So you can use the installer to do all the package installations, which is a single bash file. You can just wget curl, whatever your choice is, onto your system, run it, and it'll do install all the packages, do the first bit that you saw. And then the setup tool is executed, which does all the configuration. And that is actually a series of scripts, but you could also copy those onto all your boxes and put those on there. And there, as was hinted at before, these are all automated. There's an autopilot mode that you can engage, and that will simply do a deployment, which is part of where we're trying to get with our QA, where we can say, go to a fully automatic deployment of Kazoo, run all these tests and tell me whether or not it worked, and in the morning we'll fix whatever didn't work. So as you saw, it looked like this. Of course, this is just a standard CentOS and Kickstart file. This bit of it, the first bit that you ran into, this was the installer running, putting the packages on the system and making sure the right components are where they need to be. This bit of it was the actual setup script. And if you run either of those, while they're processing, if you hit Control-C, they'll give you the command that you would run to pick up where it left off. And so you can see how that would work. And of course, they all have help, and you can go look at the scripts. They're very, very clean bash, and it should be pretty easy to extend it. And of course, since the way that it's written, it's each one of the big couch. There's one file that runs the setup wizards, that runs another file, a modular in bash, but it is for setting up Big Couch or setting up FreeSwitch or setting up whatever the other component is. So you could extend it with your own. If you had some proprietary stuff or you were trying to deploy your monitoring environment with it, you could build off of this if you so desired. So what can you look forward to on the installation phase? Well, we're going to add offline support. We like the fact that this is a net install. It means that this ISO will always be up to date. You can download it and it will work. It will always install whatever environment you want, and it's actually a pretty small ISO, so it makes it really easy to move around and ship around and things like that. But of course, you need to be online, and not everybody is. Some people have servers that they've deployed into applications and toasters and weird things that don't have connectivity all the time. So we'll give you offline capability. We really want to improve the help. We want it to pretty much be the one-stop shop that when you're done, you have a working system with all the instructions about how to register a phone, and you're good to go. And then we need some smarter support for cluster deployment. Like I say, we currently have a wizard in there that does help you through a cluster, but it isn't smart about the other nodes. It has to ask you, what are the IP addresses of another node? Do you want to add another FreeSwitch server? Yes. What's its IP address? Another one? Yes. That's it. So it'd be interesting if we've toyed with some things we could do to do temporary sockets or something to find other nodes, multicast. We've had all kinds of crazy ideas, but to do some kind of auto detection or at least discovery of your environment. So look out for that. And again, as I was talking about, of course, since these have all gone upstream, with Camilio and FreeSwitch changes, then we now are beginning to gain cross-platform support. So CentOS has been we've been long since locked to CentOS just because we didn't have resources to build Debian packages for everything. Some projects weren't there, yada, yada, yada. So now that the FreeSwitch team and the Camilio team, of course, have already done that eons ago, we now have or will have FreeSwitch Debian packages, Arch packages, all those things. And so now all we have to do is convert our Kazoo project, and now you'll be able to go across different platforms. Windows, for instance, is supported by both those guys. Maybe we'll get to that point. Anybody want to run it on Windows? Good. Kristen and QA might, yeah, it might be more convenient. So, of course, we've been talking a lot about Monster UI at this application, at this conference. So it's released. We obviously put the core out there. Earlier upstairs, I also moved all the remaining repos that are currently complete into public domain, so you should be able to see the account manager, number manager, smart PBX, webhooks, and PBX connector. So those are all now there for you to go hack on, play with, commit code back. Yes. Thank you. And so I would like to show you that we're not stopping there, and we have been working on this for quite a while. So here is up-and-coming apps. So this one is the new Carriers app that we're working on. Obviously not quite ready for release yet. But I can come in here, I can say, add another, I can choose, oh no, now I gotta play with display settings. Here we go, bear with me. And glad somebody said that, I wouldn't have noticed for quite a while. All right, let's see if that goes. Aha, okay. And yes, we want to keep these changes. Okay. Let's see if we can get some new resolution here. See if the projectors will do that. That might be asking a lot. Oh, okay, that worked. Okay. All right, so I'll exit back out of that. So there we go. So there's the carrier app as it currently is. So what we're doing here is we're listing the carriers that are currently associated with this particular account. And I can come in here and I can say add another carrier. We'll just call this Kazoo. I can put in some server. I can choose my authentication mechanism. Now those IPs that it's showing us are the IPs that I purchased on the first stage. I don't know if you guys have noticed there's a new database in there and a series of subcommands called the dedicated IPs. That's where it's drawing it from. So if you had a pool or a range of IPs that you wanted to provide to your customers so they could purchase them and just without interrupting you, they could go in here, buy IPs, route their carriers to it, life is good. And with the dynamic integration back into Camilio, now we can say, hey, if it comes from this IP, this is where it goes. We can make those queries from Camilio to Kazoo and then route those calls accordingly, put account IDs on them there, do all kinds of interesting things. Or, of course, the boring SIP username and password. So I can then come in here, add a role. So let's just say that this one provides US DID service. And I can turn on and off the roles on this particular carrier. I've got my my advanced settings. So how many of you know about carrier flags? A couple of you are going to learn a lot more about them when faxing updates. But so carrier flags let you set a flag on something like a device. It's an arbitrary flag or series of flags that you have, and you might say call a flag premium. And you set premium on your carrier, and now when that device issues a call, when step switch hunts for the resources to fulfill it, it will filter them by the flags that are on both. And so it lets you do all kinds of very interesting routing. The reason I bring up faxing is faxing will be to support T38. You need fax flags on both sides. But so this, we exposed, I think it was a comma delimited field in the old UI. So now we have, a nice pretty, we can require flags, we can add some flag, TST because E's are overrated. And we can manage the flags in the UI in a nice pretty way. Of course we have audios and codecs and video and all the advanced gateway settings. There's some ones in here that you might not be aware of. Who is aware of the custom SIP interfaces on the gateways, on the resources, sorry. I have one person here. So this lets you have a SIP interface 2, which is on the public, where all your traffic's on SIP interface 1, which is the private VLAN for whatever your crazy network is. So there's been things in the system like that do static URI mappings and things like that people haven't been aware of because we haven't been able to bring them into the Kazoo UI, or they were built for one person and turned out to be useful for other people. So as we go through Monster, we're looking at all these documents, we're looking at the schemas, updating the schemas for one. We're saying, what have we left behind and can bring back in to provide, since we've already got the functionality, we just need to expose it. So once I have that, I have my list here. On the list, I can then come over here and say calling priorities. So who knows on the weights, is a low weight going to be the first one or a high weight on the current UI? I think so. The one that is. So we now have a nice pretty drag and drop interface here that we can sort them around. Also, who has had a carrier go down? Anybody? Anybody? So I can come in here and say, oh, you know what? He's not working right now. I'll turn him off for the next hour. And then I'll come back and turn it back on later. And then, or I can get very granular, and I can say, well, here's the list of services or classifiers. This is dynamically pulled from your database, your classifiers. They don't have to be this, so whatever you put into your system. And I can say for toll numbers, I want Sprint to be first in this particular case. For US DIDs, let's go ahead and put Verizon up top because we want good quality people complaining. We'll turn off AT&T so they won't be used. And I can save the changes. So I'm getting a lot more control over the routing engine in step switch from this. And I can see I've got nothing to cover my Caribbean, international, or unknown phone numbers. So it gives me some information as well as how it's going to route. And then the last bit here is carrier templates. And carrier templates are partial resources that show up on the sub-accounts. So that, for instance, you could say, well, here are 6 known carriers, and I've pre-configured all the complicated stuff for you. Punch in your username and password, and it works. And so you can provide these both globally or locally if you're a reseller or sub-account or something else like that. So it's kind of where we're going with that. And, of course, it's going to do that. Where are the screen settings? Actually, is there... Can we just... Anybody know how to make it just do it on both? Swap, duplicate, there. Yes. Yes. Stop. If we restart. Yeah. It changed the display settings. Well, that's not what we wanted. All right. That's unfortunate. I had another demo that's going to require some shifting. Okay. So again, we are continuing. So this one is the branding app. Well, that's pretty difficult to see, but this is actually a mock-up. It's in progress right now. But on the white labeling tab on the Kazoo UI, there's a couple fields there. Service URI, service name, some other ones like that that let you white label the emails. Pretty sure nobody knows exactly how those work. other than sometimes they do. So we are replacing that mechanism with WYSIWYGs. You'll be able to go in there. We'll have tokens you can drop into the email templates, first name, last name, whatever you see fit. And so this is what the application is going to look like. And again, that is actively being developed. I just didn't have a version that I could click through right now to show you because it's back in the office. So that's coming. And then, of course, the next one would be user portal. A lot of people have been asking, where's the user portal? So here's the mock-ups. That's not currently being worked on, but that'll be the next big one that we do. And of course, mock-ups don't necessarily translate to the actual application, but you get an idea what we're targeting here. And interestingly there, of course, at the end of it, make calls. Well, that would be kind of nifty if users can sign into their portal and just use WebRTC and the other technologies to make a call from there, or use that to do the callbacks for your voicemail. So you click the button, say, call this guy back. It does it in the browser, perhaps. And, of course, we're creating a community app store. We're unleashing the monster. So you guys can participate in that. The code is now there, open source. You can get early access as we flush out what an app store means to us and start deploying that. You'll have, you'll be the first there, early access with all of that, so you can join us as we work on that path. So you can look forward to Carriers app, the branding app, the user portal, an operator console. We saw WebSockets. We have some limited call control actually in Crossbar right now. We have Pivot, which could, do call control as well. So you could build a pretty nifty operator console. We've been floating ideas around. And of course, we're going to move the call flow app to as an application to the Monster UI. So let's talk about Provisioner. Obviously, you guys saw a demo over here on the rack with some of the progress that we've made with a new provisioner, yet again, another provisioner. But we've split this one into three basic concepts. Of course, it's a standalone system that integrates through APIs with Kazoo. And so, of course, you could just consume those APIs and use it just as a generic provisioner. Smart PBX uses it via the device API. You punch in a MAC address. That's all you have to do. That's actually how all those phones were brought up. We punched a MAC address in, pulled the power cord out of the bottom of the switch, put it back in. Our router is option 66 and 160 enabled. The phones all came up. So that's pretty awesome. And an advanced provisioner, which I believe you guys saw the UI for, that exposes all of the settings based on templates. So we've made good progress here. So we now have an actual template engine that makes sense, given that this is our third time. You guys might have heard me say this before. It's only right after the third time. We actually know what we need now. We know how to build it now, and we're actually building it correctly. So we have templates that make sense, that are all modular. They're encapsulated in a module that carries a bit of logic as well to translate abstractions of common instances into something specific for the phone. So to give a rundown of kind of how that looks, time zone being a good example. We store the time zones in UTC seconds, the offset in UTC seconds. The Yealink logic would take that and split that into UTC minutes and the very specific Yealink strings that are necessary. So it breaks it into two parameters that then go to the template that put it into the proper place within a Yealink specific configuration file. All of that is modular. So for instance, you could tar up and package and ship out a Yealink plugin for the provisioning framework. And so we're building out the various makes and models that you could just drop in and plug in there. Of course, it supports TFTP and HTTPS and anything else under the sun, because unlike the previous one, it is actually generating files, and we'll talk about that. But so again, we moved to actually generating the files this time, whereas the previous one was dynamic. It would just generate them in PHP and ship them out. We added a lot more time zone support. That's, I don't know. It's funny how little things always become the biggest problems. And the clock on the phone, even though the phone works perfectly and everything is happy, is the one thing that everyone complains about if it's wrong. It could be offline and they'll complain about the time on the phone. So that took a bit of time. All the phones have a different way of doing time zone. We have BLF support in the provisioner. So it's not tied. I wrote limited here because it's not tied to Smart PBX yet. we have to be smart about not taking over the lines on the phone with the BLF keys, and we haven't gotten through that. But the advanced provisioner gives you enough rope to shoot yourself. So if you want to make all your lines BLF, you can. It's been tested and QA'd now for quite a while against all the Kazoo default features, and things like the Polycom phones giving you the buddies button and stuff like that. We're hiding that now. Forwarding, which sort of support on Kazoo, we took that button off so the users don't do something silly. And why did we not improve the old provisioner? Why did we go with a new one? Well, the old provisioner is actually kind of scary in the way that it works. It sounded like a great idea at the time to dynamically generate the files, skip the file system, and now you don't have to rsync files around. It could be super distributed. You just go back to your Big Couch database. We know how to manage that. Run it on 17 servers. We're good. We've got a distributed provisioner. Except that if you don't have flat files and you generate them every time, if there's a bug in the code, you generate the wrong file for every phone you've provisioned. You take your entire cluster offline. Turns out we introduced a single point of failure without even thinking about it. Because we're really worried to update the provisioner. We have to be really careful. We don't want to kick all of our phones offline by sending them, an extra space after the question mark or something silly like that. Or you just close the PHP tag and have an extra A at the bottom, or a :S or W. That never happens, right? All the phones are going to freak out. So that was a mistake. It also made us, extremely wary to update or roll it out or do anything else. And nobody can back it up. You can't make a tar. You can't do anything with it because it's all dynamically generated. So that's why we went back on that decision and had to kind of revamp it, which is where the new provisioner is coming from. And so that means we will be decommissioning the old provisioner for those of you who are currently using it. And as we do so, since we'll have to move the phone somehow, we're also going to try to roll out the SRV record support and be a lot more friendly to VoIP, because with SRVs we can obviously get a lot more control, but it requires Kazoo to start talking to a DNS server, which we have to be careful about because we don't want to ship up and say, hey, DNS server, delete all your entries. Oh, whoops. I meant for that account. My bad. So, we're working towards that. It does take some coordination to make that happen, but that is something that we're proceeding on. So you can look forward to some enhanced security. So the current provisioner and the previous provisioner and all other provisioners have very limited security at best. Most have none. The trick with doing a secure provisioner is supporting this various clever ways that various phones provide security. Now, it's actually gotten a lot better, but one of the simple things you can do is at least keep them from being able to scan the provisioning database. So security through obscurity, so to speak. And you do that by providing some kind of one-time file that the phone can pull down that redirects into for UI deep folder structure or something. Maybe they dial a pin, it comes up, gets a file that registers dial a pin that allows it to fetch the next file, which is then, for UI deep. And so while sure, if you sniff the network or something, you're going to grab those. They're all plain text anyway. You're going to get that information. Those phones will be compromised. You can't just write, a bash for loop that goes across all the MAC address space is really small. Doesn't take very long to crawl it. So that's kind of where we're going with that, and we're still working out what that'll look like. Actually, as a matter of fact, last night at the bar I learned some interesting things that we might start using. Some of the redirect services and things like that have come a lot further than I was aware of. So we'll start looking into that. Obviously, we need more makes and models. It takes a lot of time. The Polycom, I don't know who has seen the Polycom SIP admin manual. Okay. It is a monster. Those phones are hugely configurable. Even if we spent the next year doing it, we wouldn't support all the features that they have. But each phone has something along those lines. Some of them aren't well documented, as surprise, surprise. And some of them have weird caveats to them. So it takes a lot of time, energy, and effort to create those makes and model templates and make sure they work, redeploy them. Oh, it doesn't work with the new firmware, et cetera, et cetera. So, again, coming back to that, we are adding firmware support. This is something the current provisioner does not have. Big problem. It was kind of an afterthought. We'll throw that in. Proved to be more difficult than it seemed. So we are adding from day one firmware support, and advanced firmware support is coming, where you'll be able to say these group of phone are running my beta program, so they get this firmware A/B testing or whatever you want to do. And in user provisioning, that's just user gets box, opens box, phone works, magic happens somewhere in the middle. So we're working towards that. We're trying to get there. So I hinted at this one before, Project Phonebook. So Project Phonebook is a project to unify number management across all the various carriers. So it's aggregating multiple service providers, their available number pool. How many of you have searched for a number and it took more than 10 minutes on a particular carrier's website? How many of you have found a carrier's website that you didn't know how to use? So we are building one API set, all carriers. We don't care where the number comes from. You say, I need a 415. It says, I've got billions of them. Pick one. So it is significantly faster. It exists today. And it works really, really well. There's some nasty things it has to do to make it work really well, like screen scrapes and things like that, but it does actually work. And it has support for blocks, number blocks, or contiguous numbers, which is, I mean, a lot of people look for things like blocks of 25, 15 numbers, 5 numbers, you know, and they want them, but nobody has a good search for that. And if you make the request without going in and saying, here's a list of numbers, they scroll through it and pick the ones, you say, here's 5, I can be smart about it. I can say, here's 5 from the first part of the block, not the middle of the block, splitting it into 2 smaller blocks. So we can do number management on this side now by saying, I'll give you these options from these 7 blocks I know. They're all blocks of 200 on my side, but I give you the first 5 out of each one. So you have choice, but you're not breaking up my big blocks for the next guy who wants 100 numbers. So, and we can do that because we can do that from a much larger number pool. So I can look at multiple carriers, and I can even put those together as blocks, as aggregated blocks. I can say you can make a contiguous range by purchasing these 6 numbers from this guy, these 4 from that guy, and these 2 from that guy. Or I can do smarter things like say, this is my lowest cost guy, these other 2 guys are also offering it, I'll try him first, and then I'll maybe try the other 2. And if I really don't like his service, we'll just port them into my good carriers. And we're adding support for vanity numbers. It's just much easier to search for vanity numbers when you have all the numbers. It's amazing. So you can look forward to much easier number acquisition. The largest, we're hoping, the largest number pool in the US, since we have lots of agreements and there's lots of people who post on their website here, search for numbers, those are screen scrapable. And fully automated porting. That's the big one. So that's really hard to do, and we are trying to tackle that in Project Phonebook. Internationalization. So we did hear a little bit about this. We do have people coming from outside the U.S., which is fantastic. We have quite a lot of uptake in all other countries, and we haven't been very diligent about making sure that our platform works well there. So we have had a bit of a learning experience. I didn't know the dialing rules for most countries except for the US, or how to dial to them from the US. So when it comes to how do we go about coding up something, we have to go learn the rules for that country, and there's quite a few countries. So it's kind of been an on-demand thing, and or, well, here's some more regexes that if you know what you're doing, you can make it work in your country. Excuse me. So there are differing formats. You, of course, in addition to being able to route the number, you need to be able to show it in a way that the user expects. You need different languages. You need prompts in different languages. Thank you very much, guys. You need API errors. So prior to that, we didn't have a way to internationalize our API errors. Because the text that you saw on the screen, which I'm sure you've all seen, so anybody here seen a schema error? Right? That was not something you could go and put through an internationalization process, because it was just a string, and if you start parsing it, you're going to, that doesn't work quite well. And differing time zones, that is a whole other bit of complexity there. New Zealand time zone continues to come up in the local time library that we use. Didn't properly represent the DST rules. You know, how are we going to know that? So we continue to work through these kinds of things. And there's, of course, still more to do. Time date formats. I think everybody should use the US format because it's much more convenient for me. But they disagree. Apparently there's currency differences, differing rules on emergency services. Some people don't do porting, some people have different procedures in porting, etc. But I am happy to say it is now very usable outside of the United States. With enough tweaking, you can get it to actually pretend to be a native PBX or native trunking platform with the right languages and the right routing rules. And we are, with the additional work that Luis has done with dial plans, you can now reformat them on a per account basis, which lets you do things like add your country code automatically and things like that. So we're getting there. We're very close. And of course, it presents some unique challenges in Kazoo when you have multiple zones, and the zones are in different countries, and depending on the zone, you have different rules. And number normalization, if you're trying to build out big clusters, you're probably in multiple countries, so you can't write one rule to reformat all the numbers, which is why we leaned on E164. At least some type of number normalization is super, super, super critical. And to that point, I don't know, who has heard of lib phone number? A lot of people. Nice. Excellent. More than I expected, actually. So it's a library from Google. It's actually fantastic. We've known about it for quite a while. More recently, there was an Erlang port. Well, not more recently, but recently discovered an Erlang port of this, which gave me lots of hope. And there was also a PHP port, which I'm using in the project phonebook as an experiment to see what the library was like and get to know it a little bit. And it is fantastic, and it is something that we really, really want to bring in for our routing engine. The catch here, though, is how do we integrate it into the project without breaking all the numbers and all the routing that you already have with your custom regex rules that have written numbers in whatever format that you might have written the number in. So we're working on that, and we'll get there. I don't know if you guys have been following the PHP SDK. It's been becoming much easier to use. More APIs are being added to it well, not every day, but at least each week. It's pretty easy to add APIs, and it's more efficient and highly extensible compared to the old system. So if you're looking to do some kind of scripting against the APIs, or if you're like me and just have a need to go find something in the APIs, update 100 accounts or something like that, it's actually really quite nice to grab a really simple to use SDK and just say bang out some script. And just as an example, right here we apply a filter to finding all the users that gives us just the admins. We then fetch each of the users. We set a flag, require a password update equal true, and we save it back to the system. So very few lines of code. Really easy to do. Supports all the various authentication methods. This is using username password realm, but you can use API key, or if you've got IP auth on, it has a none placeholder. So we're continuing that endeavor, so you can look forward to the complete API support. It is absolutely my intent to support all of the APIs, the various elements that are in there, the children, descendants, all that is already there. You can get the channel statuses out of here, so you can list all the channels that are currently up for an account or a user. And so we're continuing that, which also means this will be a great, for anybody who's looking to build another SDK in your favorite language, this might be a good place to go look and see, kind of as an example, what it might look like. And I hope to add data type casting using the JSON schema. Arrays and objects in PHP are often confused, and in some other languages, and the schemas would allow me to resolve that automatically for you. Validations need to be iteratable, and I'm going to add helpers for webhooks, web sockets, and call flow building into here. So you'll be able to pull this down, grab those guys, and use those helpers to do that building. So let's talk a little bit about screen pops, because this has been one of the ones that has been really commonly requested. So this is, big thanks goes to Krill on this one. He actually did this entirely on his own, and then came back to us and said, would you be interested? And we said, oh yes, please. So we have, it's written in Qt. It has support for all the major platforms, of course, so Linux, Mac, and Windows. It lets you link to any CRM, because you just put a URL into it. Lots of convenient options there, and a great example of what you can do with WebSockets. So let's just real quick here. That's probably it. Yep. Yep. Hey, it's a screen pop. So it's come up. It's given me a link until it stopped ringing. And it gave me a link that would open a URL of my choosing that can be tokenized. So if I show you the settings real quick. So I've given it my username and password. It went through, found all my devices. That's the things that are going to cause screen pops for me. It's bound, of course, to a particular WebSocket URL that I've provided there. And then the last one, I've asked it just to open localhost Kazoo pop-up, and I've added caller-ID-number as a token to populate the caller ID with. Continue slideshow has disappeared. All right. So that is what we currently have, and that's what it looks like. You just saw it before. It's open source. It's it's on our repo as we continue modifying it and enhancing it further. So if you're looking to play with it, internationalize it, see what we're doing, or participate in that, feel free to go take a look there. And what we're doing, where we're going with this, is we're targeting a no configuration download. For instance, if you could sign into the user portal, click download my screen pops, and it was just an exe, you double-clicked it and it was running or it installed, but you didn't have to punch in any of that information you just saw that was configured when you downloaded it, that would be pretty awesome. We want to extend it further with some user profile management, turn on and off call forwarding, voicemails, those kinds of things. And so, and some enhanced user customizations, when to do screen pops, and things like that. So that's kind of what we've done. There's a lot more. Clearly, we only have so much time. So come see me if you have any other questions. But I want to go through what we're working on. So I have a long-standing dream to have more statistics, and in particular, I like the idea of having SNMP support in the platform because there are so many tools out there that can use that. And with the WebSockets and with the APIs that we have, there's no reason we can't build a nice dashboard for call completion statistics and just the state of your cluster. There's an API in there right now that lets you issue subcommands through the REST interface if you haven't seen that. And it is my intent to extend that further by a query string. You could specify a node or all nodes, which would let you manage your cluster from a UI. We're working on federation. Who here has heard about federation in Kazoo? Everybody should have. This is allowing you to run separate isolated zones, but operate them as a cluster. So it's a loosely coupled but highly cohesive environment, which means that you are fault tolerant, and when one node or data center falls down, the rest of them continue, but yet BLF works across the two data centers or zones. And other such features. This also has a wonderful impact of reducing the load significantly, removing rabbit as a point of failure, because of course it would be within the zone. You can then have a cluster of rabbits in the zone, you're good, or have warm failovers in the zone, which we've supported for a long time. It increases your scalability dramatically, and it provides that isolation. So that has actually been code complete for a very long time. Everybody is waiting for somebody else to turn it on. So somebody needs to go first. Because we've done all the testing that we think we can. We're still testing it. We're always looking for edge cases. I think it works. I don't know of any issues right now with it, but we're not running it in production. So there are going to be edge cases in there. When you park a call, then transfer it, and then try to repark it in a different zone, there might be some weirdness there. So we need to know about those things, and if you guys are willing to do some QA work on that, or just go for it, turn it on, then we would love for you to send us your feedback. I can talk to you about that offline. It's actually a configuration file, config.ini. Some people have it on. Syntab has it on. Yep. What it is with some people, they're not using all the features, so you can turn it on those systems safely. For our platform, right, we use everything in Kazoo. So that's where you run into the corner cases. So when you have somebody who's making vanilla calls like those guys are, also with the conferencing, which we know works, and things we've vetted and QA'd, we can turn it on in production. But when it comes to Does trunk store, because you can route trunk store to call flows and then back again, does that work? Well, we haven't had a chance to get through all the corner cases there. I hinted at this before with Camilio and FreeSwitch now having real-time call control. So this is truly a class 4-5 hybrid. This is exciting stuff. This is big differentiating factor in the platform versus, you know, some Soho Office or even bigger switches. So it's really quite exciting as far as the performance and the capabilities of the platform goes. So what do we mean by that? Well, class 4, proxy switching. Class 5 is where you do all your media handling. Now they're in one platform. There's a great I have what I think is a great way to phrase this, is you put your aces in your places. You use the right tool for the right job, all those kind of idioms apply. And so now we finally have an excellent tool to use for just plain SIP routing when we don't have to do any of the media handling. We're working on build and release transparency. So, of course, as we start to try to involve more and more people in the community with the actual implementation, design, and building of the code and the direction of the platform and try to extend into that, we need to be more transparent with that. Some of the things that we've done, in the interest of time, I won't tab complete, but you can go into GitHub and in a lot of the repos, especially the Monsters repos that just got released, there's a design folder, and that's the design process. It contains a markdown file, which is our typical, which we're trying to get into with writing specs, features, and where we want to go with things. And of course, you can participate in that by issuing pull requests against a specification, saying it would be great if it did this, or what have you thought of this? You can write comments on them, et cetera, et cetera. And that's only the start. We're working towards better tickets, better release notes is a big one. Other automated build tools and mechanisms to push out, notify you guys, get you involved, tell you what's coming, what we're doing, where you might be interested in contributing some effort or time. And then a big one that I kept getting asked in the conference, database upgrades and improvements. So obviously we've been on Big Couch for quite a while. So we are working to move to Big Couch, CouchDB 1.7.x. If you don't know already, Cloud has committed or contributed their code back, and it is the reintegration is code complete. It's on the master branch. I've compiled it and run it with Kazoo. It seems to work great, but there is no existing migration because well, I'm still playing with this one, but the file format has changed, so you can't just update to this. You'll have to do some type of migration, or maybe the DB clone tool comes into play here. And there's no, apparently the zones aren't supported anymore, or weren't moved over, which we can maybe add that in as a community contributed. We can maybe do it through HA proxy. I'm still trying to figure out what we'll do with that one. But once these packages are available, for anybody who's not running with zones, and we have a migration tool available, and everybody has started the move, we'll go ahead and start depreciating our Couch, Kazoo Big Couch repo. For those of you who haven't seen it, it has a new UI you can look forward to. It's kind of pretty and nice, and it helps you through JSON. If you ever in the JSON document and you get done with a very long document, you hit the thing and it says, no, there's an error somewhere. This actually shows you where the error, which will save me a ton of time. And we're looking to replace Couchbeam. So that's the low-level library that we use since we were using Couch, not Big Couch. So it's quite old, and it's beginning to show its age. And if we go and start replacing that, there's some additional stuff. There's been work done in the project where you can ship all of your CDRs off to a different couch than where your configuration lives, and we want to extend on that, but we're kind of constrained by the fact that our current Couch library, we really manage a connection. Additionally, we could drop the need for HA proxy. We could do all of that in an application-aware way, which would be interesting because then we could even start sharding into your accounts into various Big Couch clusters, and then we could do all kinds of interesting things. So you can look forward to overall system improvements once we get the Couchbeam replaced and the Big Couch updates. There's been lots of improvements in the couple years that Big Couch has been there. It's a project with active development, and they actually have support for our 16B. So you can go ahead and relax about that. We will update. Where else are we going? Well, we're going to go to a pool party at some point. And what I mean by that, how many of you know about Project Minnow? Okay. Well, this is a single board computer that's coming from Intel that has quite a lot of processing power. And something that we, about every year, we go and try again. Does the new board have the capacity to be 1,000 free switch nodes controlled by two large Kazoo nodes? So we're going for Project Pool Party with the Minnow boards to see if, once again, we can put a data center in play that is filled with these things in a rack and has two servers at the top that controls a massively distributed system. Low power, master distribution, isolation, that's a pretty nifty system. Big possibilities there. More phone book. Well, we're going to continue enhancing Project Phone Book, internationalize the number inventory, more cost control mechanism, and much smarter search routines in there so that that number selection stops becoming such a pain point that it is kind of right now, at least in our hosted platform, it's rather slow. We're going for more international coverage, of course. We're extending the clusters internationally. We are beginning to reach out more as we start to get more feedback from our international partners. And, well, of course, we're getting more international developers. So world domination is clearly just a little bit away. And for those of you who are on the hosted Kazoo platform, we are working on hardware updates. We have started rolling out new database servers with SSDs. We are expanding our hardware as well. We are adding more capacity to our cluster as we are continuing to grow. You can, of course, we'll be rolling Monster UI out more publicly. It has actually been there for quite a while. We'll be updating Camilio with the new Camilio patches, which includes the enhanced BLF and parking and call routing logic as well. Adding the Google fax printer and fax email to fax capabilities to the hosted cluster, and of course the cluster expansion. So look forward to those things. And for those, for the rest of you guys, we really love it when you contribute. We're looking for test tools, documentation. You can fork and issue pull requests from GitHub, community scripts. I know you guys have a ton of things you wrote just to do one little thing. You all wrote that same thing. I guarantee it. You're all using the same platform. At some point, you had the same pain point. So I would love for it if you guys just throw it up. We've got a community scripts. Just throw stuff at it. I'll get it organized or write documentation or help you do whatever we can to start to build those things up. And recently, we had somebody built a PHP tool. Sorry, I forgot who it was. And it's basically MySQL dump for couch, which is awesome. I mean, who can use that? Right. So, those are the kinds of things that we can help each other out with. So you guys, thank you very much. Keep on kazooing and enjoy the rest of the conference.